think that's we've got 28 people in the room. I'm sure there's more will be joining. I think that's as good a time as any to kick off. So thanks again for joining us today this is our fourth webinar now. We're evolving each week. I'm trying to take feedback and just make it as good as possible. I've got a headset this week, so hopefully that my voice will sound better. It won't be echoing or ruining anyone else's sound at all. So I've got that working. Plus, if you won't be able to hear the seagulls or the cats crying. It'll just be me from my house. But today we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion. Now, this is such a huge subject, and I appreciate we could probably do a webinar every week just on this very topic and kind of how it branch off into different areas. But we're going to cover a couple of areas of it today, namely really how we kind of embed it into our businesses, looking at it from a recruitment point of view as well, looking at it from a talent retention as well, which is just as important. So my name's Paul Church. I'm the MD of Interquest. The format for this week will be a little bit different because we've got two experts. So hopefully that'll mean less of me, more of people you guys would like to hear from. I'll just simply be facilitating things. I'll intro them both in a second, ask a couple of questions. Today, what I'd like to do as well is we always allow for some Q&A at the end. And I kind of shoot the questions out, but I thought maybe based on feedback I've received, I think just to make it a little bit more interactive, if you do have a question for either of our two speakers today, just pop a note in the chat box that you'd like to ask one, then I'll open you up and you can kind of ask them yourselves, and I'm sure you can articulate it a lot better than I ever could. Just to intro our guests then. So first of all, we've got Ben Major, who's the Recruitment Director at Mother. He focuses on talent strategy, partnerships, and D&I. And we've got Joanne Ralfe, who's the Head of Operations at Tribal Worldwide, Pitch 100 Superwoman 2020, BIMA Diversity and Inclusion Council member. But Ben, would you mind just kind of introing yourself, I suppose, a little bit more eloquently than I could, just a little bit about your background, and I suppose why kind of this topic we're talking about today is so important to you?
Hi everyone. So a bit more about me. I started out at Ecom actually, here in Paula's agency, and through that worked with some really incredible agencies, and RGA was one of them, and I got the opportunity to join them. RGA is a great agency in how they come at talent. I think they were way ahead of most agencies at the time in building in-house talent teams that cover a wide spectrum of issues. From RGA, I was lucky enough to go on to Mother. Mother hadn't had a kind of internal talent system as such, so I was brought in to bring wider thinking around talent and how that involves all of the silos of D&I, L&D, the partnerships they have, how they work with schools, how they work with their local business, their neighborhoods, and to put some strategy behind their recruitment and their people structures. I was also lucky enough to be a non-exec director at Brixton Finishing School, which is an incredible social enterprise that connects underrepresented people to opportunity in the creative industries. So I've been with them a couple of years and have helped them with their curriculum and their strategy going forward. And so I've only been at Mother for the last few months. I started in Feb, so my first month was in the office, and then I was straight into lockdown, and then obviously over the last few months I've had a real learning curve, and yeah, really nice experience there, and how I've helped them get through the last few months, and that's me.
Cool, thanks Ben. And Joanne, kind of same to you as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo. So I head up I'm head of operations at Tribal, and that encompasses project management, recruitment, talent, day-to-day operations. And basically part of my remit is to look at how we bring people into the business, how we keep them, how we grow them, and then how we sort of, when the time is right for them to leave, or they've got something on, how we exit them in the right way. One of the reasons I have always been really into D&I is actually I'm neurodiverse. So at the age of about 9, I couldn't read or write, and I got taken out of the normal schooling system and put into a remedial schooling system for 2 years, and slowly but surely edged back into mainstream schooling. Never quite succeeded very well. And my brain is wired differently. and the way that I look at things is very different to most people. And quite early on in my career, when I started out on TV, I realized actually it was my superpower, actually, the fact that I didn't think like everyone else, that also I was so used to failing because I tried to learn to read so many different ways and it just didn't work because, you know, my brain's just not wired that way, that actually I just don't know the word no. I always think there's a solution to a problem. And quite early on, I thought this is something really good for me. This is something I can capitalize on. And I've kind of used the fact that I am slightly different, my brain is slightly wired a different way, to sort of also grow and the way that I think. And I try and influence the way that people think around me because I challenge the way that they look at things and the status quo. And it's served me really well throughout my entire career. And now that I'm in a position where I probably have slightly more, you know, I can influence change a bit more, I really try and put a lot of my energy into diversity and inclusion, because it is, firstly, it's very broad. But secondly, it's just good business. It's good for you. It's good for the people you work for, and it's good for you as a company financially. And so I really am quite passionate about putting sort of D&I onto every company's roadmap, both from personal experience and also from business perspective.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. And look, I think as well, just on from that, I think it'd be good maybe if perhaps when we talked the first time, you kind of actually broke down the differences between D&I, what it is, and I suppose, and obviously we band them together, rightly so, but they're two different things when we're talking about, particularly when we're talking from a business sense. So do you want to kind of just from your perspective break those two topics down?
So for me, I would always say diversity is about sort of your demographic and your protected characteristics and sort of where you are on that. We look at, when we talk about diversity, we talk about input. So we talk about bringing people in and making sure it is diverse and we're recruiting in the right way, and how we grow different diversity talents, whether it's maybe BAME or neurodiverse people and women, they all probably have a slightly different path. And then inclusion, for me, probably the way I say what inclusion is, it's at your company having a sense of sort of connection, community, belonging, so you can bring your full self to work. Because we know people who do work in an inclusive culture actually do outperform those people who work in a restrictive culture. And so inclusion is about your setup, your environment, while diversity is more of the range of diverse skill set that you have there.
Perfect. All right, brilliant. So with that in mind, then, so if we look at, if I kind of throw a topic out there, and perhaps yourself and Ben can maybe discuss, and Ben, maybe why don't we start with you? Could we just kind of talk about maybe why, what is the importance of attracting diverse talent to your business, and I suppose how we ensure that happens when we're kind of in the interview process and we're trying to attract people in?
Sorry, say that again. What's the importance of?
Yeah, so why is it so important as a business that we do attract a diverse range of talent, so a diverse range of people to our business, and then how do we ensure that we are doing that?
Cool. So I think, yeah, back to Joe's point there, is that it's no coincidence that that kind of feeling of safety in your environment is, one, an indicator of high performance, and two, that you do attract diverse people. So the key thing that we've always established when making sure that you're recruiting diverse people is that the environment has to be right. So before you look at a technique of talent acquisition of diverse people, the place that you're bringing them has to be this incredible safe place. So it's often before you can even look at that recruitment phase, it's you almost have to look at, it's really boring, right? It's not like signing up to this great, incredible thing, or it's not saying, oh, we've just got a partnership with Brixton Finishing School, this other thing. The hard work is in how you look at everything your agency does now. So there's obviously lots of stats around when agencies have done well with diversity, is how they keep them and what their experiences is like at the agency. So the biggest part that I always tend to want to focus on is making sure that you look at everything that your agency does, or your company, whatever that environment is the best it can be. And so you have to look at all of the smaller things, so appraisals and reviews, and your office space, and your social gatherings, and the way you do things, your meetings, and almost everything, like going through everything you do in your space to make sure that it's been looked at this diversity and inclusion angle. So it's both how you bring the people in and how you retain them. Because actually, when we look at the stats, bringing in a diverse group of people at a junior level is actually relatively good. The stats often are really well between gender. The BAME stats are often a bit better. But then something happens, right? We knew a couple of years ago that we lost a lot of women before they got to director level, and there was lots of reasons behind that. And now we look at it where we lose a lot of people of colour and from other diversity stats that you lose them. So what are we doing wrong? So almost like before I ever look at why it's important to bring these people in, we have to look at why it's important that we manage to create that space and keep the people that we have, make sure that's a success. And then everything that you build upon that is, chances are, is going to work and isn't just going to be this kind of thing that you do for that year and it gets a good article and campaign, but actually nothing really happens. So that would be my key thing on that. And obviously the point of, for a business, for a creative agency, we know that a group of diverse people, thinkers, and representation is going to make the best work. And that's the only thing. This often sometimes when we have these chats, it looks like that you're doing something good and that it's important. But the main thing comes down to is that, you want the work to be amazing. And so by having that group of people do it, chances are your work's going to be a lot better than your competitors. So yeah, those are my probably two foundations of that.
Thanks, Ben. Joe?
So that whole thing with the violin lessons, apparently she went running back to me.
I'm muting myself. I think Ben's totally right. I mean, the thing is that whenever we look at diversity, we always look at hiring and how we're hiring and where we're hiring and making sure, we're hiring in the right places, and it's all about social inclusion, and we look at partnering with many people, but it's also about the next step of, is there anyone on your board that looks and sounds like me? Do I feel like I've got a future in this company? And we know, unfortunately, the stats are not very, very good with regards to having people of diverse nature or protected characteristics sitting on exec boards or in senior leadership positions. So you can bring people in, and there are lots of mechanisms to do that and partners you can do that, but ultimately your agency needs to be ready to grow diverse talent in the way that it should grow. I think the problem is maybe 50 years ago, the careers were very linear. So, you all went up a line, you did this. The reality is we live in a world of squiggly careers. I started out in TV, I did post-production, I then went to advertising, now I'm in digital. And I've done a bit of that, and a lot of people have. And the squiggly career means that we need to be able to have a representation of people who look and sound like you in senior leadership positions, so they feel obtainable. And that's probably a place that we need to look at, and something that as an industry we're falling down on. We know a lot of the stats are that we bring in 50-50 and that we lose a lot along the way, and that we need more to retain people specifically about how we grow talent in the right way. There isn't a one set approach for growing talent across the board. You have to have bespoke training and development programs for all of your staff members, as bespoke as it can be, obviously, because, if you have 1,000 employees, but you need to, it's not a one size fits all approach to grow talent, to get them to senior leadership positions. You need to have diversity in there too.
Absolutely. Okay, so if we suppose we go to Ben's point, Joe, about kind of creating that safe space in a business, when Ben's kind of talking about that kind of thing, what kind of things pop into your head about what you think you need to kind of tick off, make sure, how do you create that safe space at Tribal or where else it might be?
So ironically, I think the first thing is sort of knowing your stats. And the reason I say that is there are so many different things you can do. You can't do everything at once. If you decide that you're going to create a totally inclusive culture and you're going to tackle everything, we all know that that's going to be insurmountable. It's going to be too big a mountain to climb. So if you know your stats and pick sort of top 3 things that you're going to focus on, and then sort of create an inclusive culture for that, and then do the next 3, have a plan, have KPIs, and have something meaningful that you can sort of judge yourself against, is the way to start. What we did is we did a full demographic breakdown of where we were at Tribal and all the different protected characteristics. And we found out that actually proportionally, we have a very high amount of sort of working parents within our group. So we've looked specifically at making sure that we have working parents group and the like, and sort of during lockdown, it's probably been a huge group and support for each other for working parents. We have also looked at doing sort of open safe spaces. So where we have, you know, you're invited to come in and listen if you want to learn something, and people of a sort of, we looked at sort of doing one BAME background, and they can come and discuss their experiences and you can come and learn. And what you do is, if you know your demographic and know where you need to focus, then you can probably pick the most high impact one, because creating an inclusive culture isn't about doing a certain thing. You get cadence with it. You know, you start doing things, and then also naturally at a grassroots level, people start to do more, people start to read more, people start to think, you know, more. And it's really important to sort of show that you're focusing on something, but also giving your teams the space to also create more of an inclusive culture. Because if you, what I found is, if you give people that space, they do take it and they do then run with it. And then you have some really lovely things going on that isn't from an exec or senior leadership team, that just happen on the ground. And those are really important to sort of let those happen.
Perfect. Thanks, Joe. And Ben, how about, so if we delve a bit deeper into, I suppose, what you meant in terms of that safe space, what is it for you?
So yeah, so absolutely everything that Joe said, and I suppose you almost start at this kind of audit level, right? So you just look at everything you've been doing, and then if you find out that actually a lot of your staff are of some groups, and you know that's kind of top of your list. But as a rule, you can go through everything. And one of the big things that lots of companies are doing, which is incredible, is that unconscious bias training. I suppose that's a good starting place. Obviously, that doesn't solve anything, but it's a good place to start. So then when you've done that, you can look at everything you do and that you might do with a different lens. And so traditionally, like how we all get promoted has been the same for years, right? We get feedback, and you have this annual review. But you can almost tell now, once we've done a bit of unconscious bias training and you've looked at it, that system might be flawed, and that system might be a reason why lots of people from underrepresented groups haven't succeeded. So immediately you go, well, actually, how am I going to reinvent that part of my process? And then advertising as well and recruitment are very guilty of like celebrating success with a boozy night out, and we all know that isn't suitable for everyone, and that will naturally exclude people. If I don't drink, or if that's not the thing, I would feel that I don't belong there. I'm not able to celebrate the success the same way you guys do. And so it's all these tiny things that can all group together, and that for me, if I walked into that place and you did all those things, I would immediately be like, actually, do I fit in here? Like, I don't see many people like me. I don't socialize the way these guys do. The open planned office, like Joe was touching on, when neurodiversity is sometimes a nightmare, and you get distracted, or lots of us in advertising have undiagnosed neurodiversity, and so we're getting distracted, we can't concentrate, or anything else that's coming into that space. All these like tiny things add up to an experience that everyone has. And so if then you haven't looked at those things and you sign up to Commercial Break and Brooks and Fisher School and Dean Eddy's Shift, and you bring in all these wonderful young people and you bring them into an environment that just doesn't work, then you've almost got this like diversity churn, and that puts us back, way back than where we currently are now, where you're bringing people in, they have a bad experience, they leave, and then we're in a worse place than we started. So yeah, I would sort of almost go through this audit process. You can obviously do it internally, right? Because obviously you guys work in your company, and so you know what's best. But actually internally, you've only got a small amount of people from LGBTQ, a small amount of BAME, and a small amount of these groups. And so whilst they can give you some input into this kind of audit review, it's still probably not enough. So something that we really want to look into is doing this kind of review survey of lots of people in the industry as a whole on the things that they experience, to build just a bigger picture of like creative industry problems. And so we might not pick up on those nuances from our own staff, because maybe our own staff don't pick up on as much as they can if I put it on a bigger research panel of 100 people that identify as BAME, 100 people that identify LGBTQ, that all kind of work in creative industries. And there's lots of incredible companies around that can do that. And I think who's it spoke to the other day, the Diversity Standards Collective, I think the guy's called Rich Miles, has got a wonderful thing around that. So yeah, I would really just look at it and almost a methodical, technical way of how you get through this. It's boring. It doesn't hit a good headline. And if someone said, "Oh, what are you doing around diversity?" and you said that, they'd be like, "Oh, I was expecting you to bring in these wonderful rules and things and sign ups," and it doesn't always read well. But for me, it's the most important thing to do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. So I suppose we'll bounce between these two topics, I suppose, a little bit. But if we assume we've got that safe space, that business which we do think covers and ticks the boxes. If we look at the recruitment process itself, and we're looking at how we engage our talent we want to bring in, how we create that kind of interview roadmap, and make sure that people coming in, we're ticking those D&I boxes. What do you think is the most important things to do?
Who's that to? Sorry, me.
Yes, you, Ben. Yeah, cool.
Sorry, I missed that. What's the best thing to do?
Yeah, so if we assume we're happy with the safe space, and we'll bounce back between these. But if we go to the actual the recruitment process itself, how do we make sure that D&I is embedded in our interview processes?
Yeah, there's lots of these kind of things that are floated around from big D&I meetings, and there's stuff like blind CVs, and you must interview out of 10 people, 5 of them must be a female, 5 of them must be BIMA. And I think a few of them do have value, but there's some real big questions about it. So even, obviously, we all want to be accountable. We want to know that we are going to be better in a year's time or 5 years' time. And at the moment, we're saying, well, look, IPA, I think, are saying it's something like 18% BAME and leadership positions. I'm not quite sure on the fact, but there's some accountability, and lots of people, lots of agencies through the Black Lives Matter movement have been very public and gone, okay, this is the breakdown of my agency, and this is what I want it to be in a certain amount of time, which is accountability. But in terms of recruitment, it's difficult because you get into a really dangerous like tokenism way, because I think to myself, well, do I want to be interviewed, or do I want to be on a list because of my color, or because I'm female, because I'm this? Do I have to be on that list? And at the same time, like I'm mixed race, and I when I tick a box, I could tick the box to say that I'm white and other, and that would mean I'm BAME. But if I had a whole agency of people like me, it doesn't mean my agency is diverse. Right? That terminology of BAME is rubbish, really, in the grand scheme of things, because it doesn't touch on any nuance. Like, I've absolutely had white privilege all through my career. I've never had I've been at a disadvantage because of that. So it's difficult, all this accountability and stats around that. But the one way I've looked at it is that we know that we all want to be better, to bring in people of color and people of other diversity traits. So the main point is that actually we can't invent them, right? So if I look at black CDs, we could say maybe there's 5% of CDs are black. And so if I needed to, I want to hire a CD, then I know that there's a certain amount of them, but I can't invent any more, right? So if they're all in great jobs, I can't create this person to be in that job. So like Joe was saying, we're going to do absolutely everything that when we hire juniors to make sure that they're going to be going up to being credible CDs. What I can at least do is I can know that 5%. I can have that relationship with that group. And it's the same with like female CDs, something like 12% female CDs. I can know them. We can have that relationship. We're lucky enough that I'm at Mother, and lots of other agencies have internal talent teams, and they can do that. That's the job, right? It's the difference between the recruitment agency and them, is that the recruitment agency is going to send people active now. And we're going to have all these small chats with people to build a community, to make sure that I know them. So when that opportunity comes up, we can make that move. And it's not just black CDs, right? That's people of color in every discipline. So then I'm shifting it from saying I have to interview 5 out of 10 people to be BAME for this particular role. And now I'm shifting it to, well, the people I meet this week, I want to make sure 50% of them are BAME. So now I'm meeting people for all disciplines, and I've got relationships with everyone. So when that role does come up, then I know who the best person for that role is, but before it's happened. And that's how we work towards. And that's why I'm doing the best thing, in that I'm making sure that I'm putting aside more time for the disadvantaged groups that don't get ahead, and that we're going to build that relationship. We're going to know each other. And so when that right time comes, and then like Joe astutely said, is that when we do hire people at a junior level, that they do need more help than other colleagues. So let's say there's accelerator schemes for people of color at junior level, and there's all these are things that that you can do to make sure they get that leg up that they deserve, because they are disadvantaged because we know of white privilege, and we know of bias, and we know these other things. So yeah, there is lots of hacks, and some of those things will work at other agencies, like blind CVs. That they will work maybe in different firms or different industries, but in creative industries it's really hard, because if I get a CV or a portfolio and I see the Sainsbury's campaign, I see some other campaign, I know who they are. It's small. I know who's done that. We know that Widen's work with Sainsbury's. I know who did it, and I kind of know it already. So I'm going to know that person. So just taking the names off and all these other hacks, I'm just not completely sure. What I do know is that I want to be accountable. But again, I have a real big problem with saying, oh, my company's 20% BAME, when I know that that doesn't tell a right story. Agencies can twist those numbers and almost brag about it, but it hasn't got to the point, because let's take the example, it's an agency full of me, and that doesn't really count. So yeah, I'd love to tell you that there's this perfect way to do it, but there's not. It's putting in that work to make sure that you're doing it across all areas, to make sure that you're always thinking of the future. But I do have a firmer point on that accountability. I'm just not quite sure how to put that out there.
No, I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you. I just want to ask Joe the same question. To the audience, we will be probably going to some questions in about 10 minutes or so. So do put your name in the chat box if you would like to ask anything around anything we've talked about so far, or any other thoughts at all. But Joe, how about, what are your thoughts around, I suppose, the hiring process and what Ben said, and of course your own perspectives on it?
So I'm very lucky that we also have we have a head of talent and a talent acquisition partner in-house. And one thing we've looked at is, with technology, we obviously, one of the major things we actually struggle with is women. Our diversity in women, it is getting better, but it's obviously not where we'd like it to be. I think a lot of tech agencies would say the same thing as I do. So what we are actually looking at is, we've had to shift our approach slightly, because it's fine if I want a senior Java who's a woman, but to Ben's point, they're not that many. So we've been trying to partner more with sort of apprenticeship schemes, schools, going in there and sort of giving of our time to also make sure that we are creating a group of young women who are interested in STEM subjects, and trying to push away the fact that society tells us only boys do that. So we are focusing sort of on doing that, and also trying to then keep hold of the talent that, we've got coming in, who are doing work placements and X, Y, and Z, and bringing them through. We're also looking at apprenticeships. We also look quite highly at social inclusion, and obviously most agencies feel like you need a degree to work there, which we're trying to question about, is that actually right? Are there other ways? So we try and do at least 3 or 4 apprentices a year in order to get the grassroots going and bring those talents in that way. With regards to recruitment, we've done quite a lot of training around it. So we've really tried to take the bias out, but it's incredibly hard. I think blind CVs, we tried it. To us, it actually hasn't worked very well. We will try it on certain roles. I think it depends, to Ben's point, on the role, of if it is quite a specific one who you're going to know who they are by the CV anyway, there's no point in doing a blind CV. But if we are looking at sort of an account manager role, yes, we will try it. So it's about knowing what levers you can pull based on the level you're looking at. But what we've done is we've also tried to look at putting together like a criteria against the role. I think too often in agencies, people go, there'd be a good cultural fit. My gut feel is they would be good. I don't want your gut feel. Your gut feel is biased. I want something you can go against. And yes, obviously we don't want to bring people in who would hate our work environment. But I think instead of saying my gut feel is they would hate it, is what a part of our work environment is not inclusive towards them. So we've done quite a lot of work around there. We've tried different sort of scales where people can mark sort of what they thought, more of a scoring system like you see with redundancy. We've tried to implement something like that. Mixed results, but it's got people thinking, and I think that's the most important thing. Because to Ben's point, we have a lot of people who maybe don't always realize the privileged position they're in, and I think also getting your interviewers to think about that they are coming from a place of privilege is really important. And so something that we've sort of been doing, we've been doing work on taking out the bias. And I'd say, look, I think we're doing well, but by no means have we got sort of a silver bullet and and we've figured it out, and I can tell you the secrets. But it's also about knowing your agency, knowing the different roles you're recruiting for, and knowing that you can flex and you can flex sort of you know, each hiring process based on that. Also, I think where you recruit is really important. You know, we have partnerships with like My G Work. We have partnerships with a lot of other people who obviously I can't remember the name of at the moment, obviously. And I think that's really important, is where you're recruiting, where are you going? I'm happy for internal recommendations, but obviously internal recommendations, we need to be really careful of not just constantly hiring people in the same image. And I think it's about being mindful about all of that. There isn't a silver bullet, there isn't a one size fits all approach, but you need to know what you're recruiting for and how you're going to how you're going to ebb and flow the system.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. And from a candidate experience perspective, when they're going through the process, from a D&I perspective, how do we make sure they have the best experience possible, do you think?
I think firstly, responding to people generally makes a very good experience. I think also with regards to interview process, once again, you have to understand that not everyone interviews in the same way. I'm gobby. I talk with my hands. If you ever asked me to come in and write something down, I would turn down the interview because of my remedial issues. I can't write very well on a piece of paper. Firstly, the coloring. Secondly, my spelling's atrocious. Sometimes Google doesn't even know what I'm talking about. So if you said, all right, so now you come in and you do a test and that, and I would immediately turn down the role. So it's about knowing, also asking people, how do they want this process to go? Remember, there is a process, but you should be outcomes driven. Your outcome is getting the best person for the role. The process is how you get there, and it can be flexed based on personal preference. You know, somebody like me interviews very differently from somebody, you know, who is a art director. And if that art director is also neurodiverse, they probably also want to be interviewed in a slightly different way. And I think it's okay to ask the question, how would you like this process to go, and taking that feedback on board.
Thanks, Joe. Ben, from a candidate experience point of view, any thoughts on that?
No, I think it's as simple as Joe says, right? You just have to ask how, you know, I want you to do really well in this process. You know, the way you've got here means that we like you, and I just want you to do the best way you can. So if I go and talk to you in a cafe with lots of people going around, that might be uncomfortable for you. If I'm there with 3 colleagues and you across the desk, again, that might be uncomfortable. If I'm asking you to do a brief or a Zoom call, do you want the camera on or off? It's just, you know, ask better questions to make people feel, again, like we keep saying, as safe as possible. And you're creating a safe environment for that person to give the best version of themselves. It's a long way from those cheesy 90s interviews where you're like, give me your biggest thoughts, and put you under pressure and do all these other, you know, shit things where you're trying to catch them out. Actually, we just want you to do really well. So how can I set that right environment for you to do the best way?
Thanks, Ben. I think I'm just going to go to an audience question now before I go back to mine. And if anybody else has any, please do pop your name in the box, the chat box. James Sandbrook, I believe you had a question you wanted to ask our speakers.
Yeah, so obviously across industries, diversity and inclusion, as we've already discussed, is a big issue at the top and the most senior levels. Do you think that this lack of diversity is systemic, of entrenched conscious and subconscious bias? And if so, do you think that the time taken to change this will be made a lot longer, as there is more need for active development of the minority groups at more senior levels?
Ben, do you want to go first on that?
Yeah, so diversity at the senior levels is a tough one to solve, like we described, but we can't often create these people for the positions. But there are definitely ways around it. So like I said, the reason why that senior level looks how it is many things, right? We've touched on the bias of how people have tended to get people that are like them, or that remind them of themselves, and that they get into this role. And we know that that's a huge problem, and that we know that we've turned a lot of people away from the industry. So again, there is, because sometimes when we use that analogy of you can't be who you don't see. So if I'm a young black man, I can't see any black leaders in my company, then I find it really hard to believe that I can take that position. But these are when all of our partners that we work with will come into play. So whereas you as the agency can't do that, then there's incredible partners like the Creative Mentor Network and these other institutions where we can provide these senior mentors to make sure that they're seeing these people in these successful positions and getting that guidance to get there. And the biggest thing around what we've discovered with D&I is that it doesn't exist without learning and development. So previously L&D is this horribly boring thing from HR and trust exercises, and it's horrible. No one wants to go to it, and it's rubbish. And so now we've got this new way of looking at it, because if we've learned anything from the past 3 months with Black Lives Matter, we definitely don't know as much as we thought we did. We thought that we were not racist, and we thought of these things, and then suddenly we've just realized that, oh my God, we've been complicit in all of these things. So L&D now for me needs to switch from making us better at our job, which often they're in there for, but it's actually L&D needs to be completely focused on your business objectives, and that is to be a better ally, a better colleague, a better manager, a better human, right? To learn all these things that we've almost had a crash course in the last 2 months that we didn't realize that we didn't do enough of. So for me, that your D&I strategy, create the safe space, and in all these other layers, actually L&D is the way that gets it there. So with that senior level leadership, yeah, it starts with unconscious bias, but we all know that is one session, it doesn't solve the problem. And then it needs to be the adaptation of all these resources and how we continue to learn to be better managers, better colleagues. And so, your D&I and your L&D is all pointing in the same direction as your business wants to be a better, purposeful business, wants to have a better responsibility, wants to have better diversity. And so for me, that L&D is incredibly important. And there's some amazing companies out there that are doing an incredible job to make us better at that. So yeah, I would make sure that L&D is completely aligned to D&I, and that for the quick fix, it's these creative mentors that you can get that maybe aren't found in your business that could be there.
Thanks, Ben. Joe?
I agree with Ben pretty much put out a lot of my thoughts into words. I think, is it systemic? Yes, it is. I think I would be disingenuous to say anything else, but I do think we're at a pivotal moment where people are starting to realize over the last 3 months their position of privilege. And I think that from what I've seen and the experiences I've had sort of with exec leaders, not only in Tribal, but across other agencies, there is a real want to change, both on a business level, because your hand will be forced at some point, but also on a human level. And I think that's really important. I do really think people do want to change. I think it's very hard to say that basically the structure that we currently work in means that I will succeed over somebody from a BAME background, and that it doesn't take away from the fact that I have done well in my career, the fact that I have got a leg up. And I watched this amazing, I don't know if you know who Uma King is, but she's Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Snapchat. And she gave the most wonderful talk about maybe 2 months ago, where she said, it's not about asking people to apologize for who they are, but it's about all of us together understanding that the system isn't fair. And we all of us have a role to play in making a fairer society. And I really think that is currently what's going on. And it's obviously really scary for a lot of people, but it's so exciting that there is this momentum to actually have meaningful change. And I do think we will see waves at the top, because how can we not if we don't make some real changes? And I think if there isn't change, there's going to be uproar.
Sorry, do you think it's going to be quite a while before we see that change at a very senior level, though, because the damage has been done for so long now that there just aren't those people to fill those positions right at the top?
I think what we'll see is a lot of accelerator programs coming on board. I think what we're going to do is probably across agencies, you'll see people trying to identify really young BAME talent and I think they will be accelerated up. Unfortunately, with the exec roles specifically, I think it'll take longer, but I think we'll see SLT, so senior leadership teams, will get very diverse within the next 12 to 18 months. I think it will be longer for the exec, but I do think we'll see some meaningful change, yes.
And just on that quickly, the other way that there's some ideas that some agencies have done around this to get more diverse voices at the top is that we touched on, there's often in agencies these kind of community groups. So there might be the Black community within DDB, and they're a group, and obviously this group gives them a really good feeling of belonging. It gives them a chance to voice issues and share with empathy people that have had the same experience. But what it can also do is then the agency can then give that group a voice and a platform at the biggest level. So let's say, for instance, there's senior level meetings once a week, then why not have a representative from these different communities in that room? So yeah, they're not senior management, but there is still a voice, and there is still, let's say, a different opinion, like in those meetings, that we're getting a different perspective. So whereas they don't exist now, is there another way to give that community, that diversity, a voice, a platform? And so, like we said, in the systematic problems, we can then maybe integrate these community groups, give them a bigger voice, give them a say at the biggest table. And that also is another way that you might be able to kind of have an immediate effect on that, whilst we do, it will take time to make sure that we're bringing through the young leaders of now to be at the senior table.
Thanks, Ben, and great question, James. Got another question from the audience. Ling Taylor, would you like to ask your question?
Hi guys, I guess this isn't really a question, but more sort of discussing what you've already discussed, such that by trade, I'm a recruiter. I'm trained to identify and recruit for the correct member of staff that would be in that new position. So as much as there is unconscious bias with regards to looking at a profile, and possibly me myself having that unconscious bias without realizing that I do that, the bottom line for me is to identify the right person for that job. And Ben, you picked up on this subject whereby I'm of colour, but I wouldn't want to be that tick box. I wouldn't want to be selected just because I am not a white privileged person, which is probably the norm of our industry being in marketing. So one, I guess the steer is, how do I direct my stakeholders to understand we're all talking about this subject, we're all talking about being very diverse and inclusive. But for me, the contradiction is, I want to find the right person. I don't want to submit and waste your time. And not only that, everyone else's time interviewing possibly someone that isn't right for the job, when you do have candidates that are more relevant to the position that we have, because it's a tick box. So again, for me, from a personal point of view, as my trade is a recruiter, but also being someone of colour, how do I navigate through that and direct my stakeholders in advising them the best sort of direction to go with this?
Great question.
Yeah, great question. So suppose when you just pick up, when you have a vacancy right now, then you can only choose from the group of people you know. I don't know what company you work for or how it works, but we have to then realize that we're maybe in a privileged position where we can almost look at the whole world as a talent pool. So we have, in creative industries, we have Amsterdam and Berlin and New York and LA and these great hubs. So if I was looking, for instance, for a CD and I really wanted to bring in a person of color with CD, I can make my field as big as possible. I have that luxury to do that. And luckily enough at Mother, lots of people are interested. And so I've got a bigger pool to go in. So I can spread it as far and wide as possible. But it does come back to that point where, okay, that's just not right time, right place for it now. But if I engage, if I have a good shortlist of incredible people that are at their best, but are a person of color, then I know at one point I want to bring in this person. This person is incredible for that job. And so if I create that relationship now, then hopefully in the future that could be useful. And the other side of it is that we often always want to hire someone better than ourselves. And so if there's an ECD and they're looking at CDs and they've got just all white CDs and they want to bring in a CD and they know that, they want to bring in some diversity, then there is some weight to our representation. So there is some, you know, I know that I cannot be better than that CD because we've got different lives, different perspective. I know that, you know, like Joe said, lots of neurodiversity people have this incredible, whether it's dyslexia or whatever, they have an incredible creative thinking. I can't be better at them at jumping from A to Z. I can only do A, B, C. So there's some weight behind our representation, our neurodiversity, and that needs to be accounted for when you're considering candidates. So there is a bit of that, but again, if we put people into these roles that aren't prepared for it, and it's tokenism, then we will take, you know, some real big steps back because it might not work out, and then that's a really terrible story, and it puts us back a few steps. So I would keep on the education level of making, you know, your stakeholders aware of that situation, and then just keep making sure that you are getting the time to make sure you develop these relationships with people in all different roles, and you know that once they come up, that's great. And it's all about just finding the work that you love, or finding the agencies that you love, knowing who did that great piece of work. Then you know that they're incredible for that job. They go into your list of people, great female leaders or great black CDs or whatever it is, and then you know that at that right time they're incredible, and that there's no doubt in your mind that they're going to be great at that job. But yeah, that tokenism road is hard, and it's hard to often, if it's just your voice trying to educate your stakeholders into why, that's tough, and that would be where I lean on to make sure that your company as a whole is better at educating them so they understand that without you having to explain it to them.
Thanks, Ben. Joe?
I mean, I think Ben covered a lot of it off there, but what my big takeaway from what you asked was, it shouldn't be you by yourself trying to educate people, and trying to talk about why diversity and inclusion and sort of diverse hiring is right. If I was you, I would find a board member or exec member or somebody part of the senior leadership team and get them on board to help push your agenda. Because if it's just you trying to get people to be less biased and all that sort of stuff, it's not going to work. For there to be change, it can't be one person. It has to be at an agency, company-wide level, looking at people's bias, prejudice, and then that feeds into the way that you recruit. It can't just be changing the way you recruit. It just won't work.
There's this thing also I want to touch on, in that, let's say that's an uncomfortable conversation, right? You feel uncomfortable because they're not educated in that field. And there's a big thing around when you create that safe space is this point of being comfortable in the uncomfortable. So knowing that, you can have that conversation in the safety that, you're understood, and that it's coming from a good place, and that you're not sort of going to be subjected to scrutiny on that. And it's a big thing around creating that safe space, that we can all keep having these uncomfortable conversations, and that we can get it wrong. This is the important thing. Like, we might say something, might do something that we just didn't realize was wrong, and that instead of sort of being cancelled and thrown under the bus for it, to know that we're comfortable with it, that I can call you out, and that you can be okay with that, and that we can learn from that episode and go on. And that is a really great example of creating that safe space. There's also that analogy of diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And that kind of, you could definitely tell the whole story with an agency or a creative company like that, where, okay, so it's my house party, and I invite these people, and often agencies have got the best drinks, they've got the best sofas, they've got the best benefits, they've got these best things, but you come to the party, and until you've kind of been introduced to the guy's house it is, you start to feel a bit more comfortable in this area. And then this great example of inclusion is that everyone around you is aware of that. They want to make you feel comfortable. And so let's imagine a DJ puts on a really inappropriate song that really offends you. And you could say that if you feel comfortable enough to tell that DJ, or that's uncomfortable, then that's a good thing. But actually the win is if someone else in that party knew that was an inappropriate song, and they went up to the DJ, or and then they said that's inappropriate. So it wasn't up to you to have to do it. You knew that people were all woke enough to understand that was wrong. And so I really love that analogy of how that works. And it does replicate a lot of the things that happen at agencies. It's like when you've been a +1 at a wedding and you barely know the the bride and groom, and you just feel really uncomfortable drinking all the free beers. But until you go meet them, and then you end up having a chat with the father-in-law, you suddenly start feeling that actually this is okay. You might be the only black person at this wedding or whatever, but you know, through all those things, and you knew if, you know, if someone said anything inappropriate and someone else called them out, you would feel absolutely incredible with that, and you'd probably be your best self, and you'd dance all night and you'd have a lovely time. I think a lot of that coincides with lots of things we've said today.
Great, Angie. Ling, does that answer the question?
It does. It does. I think the company that I work for are very mindful of being inclusive. We are a multicultural organisation anyway. I think the interesting part of what Black Lives Matter has happened is I don't want it to be the token of, oh, actually it's a tick box, because we have naturally been that way inclined in how we hire. We are mindful of it. But now it's a subject not only for our seniors, it's a subject for our clients. And now that it's becoming a subject for us to have, and when I say us, I talk on behalf of being a recruiter, we get, so what are you doing about being diverse and inclusive now? And my automatic reaction is we always have been. Our company force is built of multilingual, multinational people. But now, of course, our clients are more sort of involved. They're pricking their ears up and they're ticking off this box. They want to be involved in how we're approaching our recruitment. And for me, it's educating my stakeholders to say, hey guys, we have been doing this all along, but I do not want to put someone in front of you just because the client's now saying, I want 5 coloured people, black people, Asian people against 5 whites. That's not how I recruit, because recruitment for me is identifying the best talent. And if it just so happens that that best talent at that time who is available is white, albeit of a different race, then that's a talent that you would get from us. And I think that's a debate that I struggle with, because of course I want to make sure that we are being diverse and inclusive, but I don't want to hire someone who isn't right for the role. And that is that conversation that I can have with my stakeholders, but are they having that with the clients to be able to say, we're not that company just to tick off a box? But yes, it has answered my question. Thank you very much.
Good. Thanks, Ling. Thanks a lot for the question. We've still got 30 people in the room, so I've got a couple more questions, so I'll keep going. Alex Ray, are you still in the room? Do you want to answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to ask, basically, obviously the Black Lives Matter thing was a big thing, and it started to get a little bit out of hand towards the end of it. And how do you then bring the inclusion in? Because, I mean, like, I guess it's difficult because probably the UK population is 3% of black people. So how then do you get that balance within your company? Do you look at numbers, or do you look at like emotions? Like how would you deal with it? How do you bring that diversity in?
Should go to you first, Joe.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's 2 separate things. Firstly, I think we have agency standards. So a lot of people, I think, Ben, you picked it up, a lot of people signed up to sort of the IPA, was it the 2022 or something? I don't know, which sort of detailed out the diversity and inclusion we're looking at. IPA does release yearly stats about where we're currently going towards that. We're not doing particularly well, but yeah. So you can benchmark yourself against other agencies. You can benchmark against about where you'd like to be. And then you can also benchmark yourself against total sort of society. So the Office of National Statistics give you quite a lot with regards to diversity and inclusion, and they report things quite regularly. The problem with doing by that is we have a system that is built to privilege people of certain color. So we have to be careful when we do look at these statistics, is we know that the schooling system and everything else is built that people like my color succeed, is the reality. So you can benchmark against other people, but you need to be really realistic about the fact that we do live in a society that does favor certain people over others. We have to work within the confines of that while we change it. So you're not going to be able to change, people at university or university leavers. We need to look further down the line. And so it's about striving for more diversity at your agency, but also actually looking at the system and figuring out how you can help change that. It can't be it has to be both together. It can't just be one or the other. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just on that, the stats, it's always hard with the stats, right? So
Yeah.
was it nationally, you know, the national numbers, but then you got to think, well, a lot of us are based in East London. And so what does our immediate community look like? And then we need to think, well, with those numbers, how do I improve the numbers, you know, from a grassroots level? So we've talked about D&I at agencies and companies and inclusion, but actually there's almost an architecture around it where there's work to do in schools to make sure that underrepresented groups of people are choosing creative subjects and are choosing that, and that we're getting into that. And then it's around all of your partners that you have, so production partners to the cleaners, and making sure, you know, those add up, and that, you know, your clients, someone mentioned about their clients, sort of asking them questions. Well, how do our clients look as well, and have we got regulations with how we work together and what their standards are? It goes so big, and it's a really hard thing to go, oh God, where do I even start? And that we've talked about it, that you get your agency in a good place, but all of these things have an effect. The type of clients you have, like the big chat around Facebook at the moment, like, is that a suitable thing? So when you think about it in everything, and making sure you're investing in your local businesses, your local neighborhood, your community schemes and schools, everything has a part to play. And it's really hard for individual agencies to do that. It's definitely more of a industry thing. But yeah, I would, in terms of just those actual stats, I'd look at the national, but actually where you're based, where your agencies, and how it's more of a replication of your environment than maybe just the kind of national statistics.
Yeah.
Thanks guys. But Alex, you happy with those answers?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Sandbrook, you had another quick question, you say. Go ahead.
It's actually been touched upon by Alex, but yeah, it was just going to be around what is the end goal here when we talk about D&I? Do we want to create a microcosm of society in each company? And if so, is that even advisable to do so? Because it goes back to Ling's point of hiring the best people for the best role.
Joe?
I think with diversity, what we're trying to create is an inclusive culture where everyone can succeed. Ultimately, though, this is not about what I do at Tribal. This is about what I do as a human being and how I'm going to change the world. And it's yes, what I do at Tribal, and I will make it more diverse, and then I do a lot in the community. But I would like to help change the way that we educate in schools, the way that we view people when they're 2 years old, all that sort of stuff. Yes, I can start at Tribal because I am in a position of influence and privilege. So I have the ability to do that there. I can't change the school system because I don't know it, but I will try. I can petition people. The end point of diversity inclusion is we're all equal, and there is we're all, I wouldn't say colorblind because we're never going to be that, but everyone has the same start in life. Everyone has the same chance of getting a promotion. And that's the end point. I just managed to do it at Tribal because I can, if that makes sense. I want the whole society to change, basically.
Yeah, and I think with everything that's this controversial, there's always going to be resistance. I think we've seen that from the BLM protests over the last several months, and pockets of racism existed in places that we didn't even realise, whether it as we said, conscious or subconscious. Obviously, this whole D&I movement over however long people are trying to be actively putting it in place it's very important in sort of bringing everyone in, but it's working under the assumption that everyone is happy to do so. And unfortunately, there are always going to be small groups of people, whether outspoken or not, who will oppose, a great inclusion of people and a greater diversity. How do we approach those people? Obviously, education is always going to be the best front, but if you are met with resistance in those environments and you don't feel comfortable about speaking up in that environment because of certain individuals. How do you go about tackling that problem?
So if you don't feel like you can speak up, right, that is a huge red flag where you work, would be my thing. But if, say, I was, you know, I'm often the only female in a room, if I'm going to be honest. And if I didn't feel like I could speak up, I would seek out allies, and I would hope that those allies, to Ben's point earlier, those allies would help me and back me up, and wouldn't leave me to be the only person saying something about a sexist joke. And that's where it starts. You have your allies, and you if you want to do a change, you sort of go in on the people who you think can and will make that sort of behavior unacceptable. So you know which board member you can go to who can help start that conversation at the top level. Ultimately, if you are in a company that's okay with, you know, sexist jokes, and you've tried all that, well, maybe it's not the right place for you. And that would be my perspective, because I, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, I'm quite gobby, so there's no way that I would ever let a sexist joke go unchallenged, usually with a little quite hard quip back. And if I was always the lone voice, I would have an issue with that, and I would question my future at that place. But generally speaking, most people are good. You can find allies. Most people will back you up. Most people, you know, Ben said, you know, you got to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. It's so true. It's so uncomfortable, and it's so much easier just to let the comment pass. But as long as one person speaks up, other people will back you up. That's my experience. And then suddenly you're not the only person saying that's inappropriate. And then suddenly, you know, no one's making those jokes anymore.
Good point, Joe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great point to finish on. Ben, anything final to add on that at all?
I think it's just also important to remember that one of the big reasons of encouraging diversity in every company is that all the reports say that you will be more successful. So Mother will make better work, and Mackenzie will make more money, right, if they've got a more diverse exec group. So it does, you know, it's important to remember that as well. We're doing this to make better work, or to be a better company. So whatever anyone's horrible kind of underlying feelings that they might have, essentially we're saying that we're doing this to make sure that we're more successful, and that obviously the creative industry relies on it, and that if we don't affect anything from a school level, then less and less people are going to choose to come to the creative industries, and then all of us in digital creative, you know, won't have a job. So it's important that you know, all these other levels are involved. But yeah, essentially the line for diversity is that it makes better companies and we make better work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Joe. Look, I'm conscious of time, and I think those are two as good a points as any to finish on. So thank you for everybody who tuned in. If anybody has any follow-up questions to anything, then please do get in contact. I'm sure Ben and Joe will be happy to answer any other questions at all. But yeah, next week, we're going to be discussing remodeling the workplace as we look to some people going back to the offices. Some people aren't going to have offices, and what the world's going to look like. We're going to be talking about some examples of how companies are handling that. So that's next week. But again, Ben, Joe, thank you so much for today. Really, really appreciate it, and some really powerful points discussed. And I'm sure I'll probably be knocking on your door and inviting you back at some point to have another chat, if that's all right.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah, it's been great.
Thanks, everybody. See you all next week. Cheers.